students and faculty gathered signatures for a petition to remove a statue of him because Gandhi was, I think he worked as a lawyer in South Africa, but he had all these quotes that talking about Africans as deplorable, and he was complaining about the poor treatment that he had received as an Indian, but his complaint was that I am being treated like an African. So he had a rather dim view of Africans in many of his quotes. So now some would say, how can you do that for Gandhi? He's this great man of peace. He's a symbol of nonviolent resistance. Okay, I mean, that's a big part of his character, but we're complicated humans. We contain multitudes, and his view of Africans was another part of his character. And if you were only to zero in on his view of Africans, then that's something that we consider. So maybe, let's see. I just want to give a very short nugget of what both sides say about this. But James, do you want to throw in your 2 cents on what you think?
No, I'll wait till you're finished with that.
Okay. So here's a side that says you shouldn't take them down. And the view is that for those who say we shouldn't take down statues of Confederate generals, et cetera, is that we're not celebrating slavery. We're honoring the memory of truly gallant figures whose lives should be an inspiration for all of us. And where does it end? If you destroy these figures, are we going to ban the American flag? And one quote from author Samuel Mitchum, he says that those collaborators and fellow travelers who are prepared to outlaw the Confederate battle flag should also be prepared for demands to scrap the American flag. Louis Farrakhan was entirely consistent when he demanded that the United States flag be changed. When it was created, every one of the 13 stripes represented a slaveholding colony. When the country was formed, every one of the 13 stripes represented a slave state. The Southern battle flag never flew over a slave ship, but Old Glory did. And then they would point to someone like Robert E. Lee saying, well, he's been commended by many people as one of the, if there's an emblem of chivalry, it would be him, where Franklin D. Roosevelt calls him the most Christ-like American who ever lived, and Winston Churchill called him the most noble man who ever spoke the English language. And after the Civil War, Robert E. Lee said that it was the duty of every citizen, whether Northern or Southern, to cease opposition and place himself in a position to serve the country. So Robert E. Lee could have very well stoked the embers of resistance and inflamed revenge among Southerners, but he called for peaceful cooperation to reunite with the North. So somebody who would defend a Robert E. Lee statue would say, well, we're celebrating this aspect of him, not fighting for the Confederacy. So people who would be in favor of taking down Confederate statues would say that many of them weren't put up in 1860 or 1870. They were put up in 1920 at the height of the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow. And these statues are statements more of 1920 and official segregation than they are of 1860. And I think one of the big controversies was last year when the New Orleans mayor took down a Robert E. Lee statue. And he said that New Orleans was America's largest slave market, a port where hundreds of thousands of souls were bought, sold, and shipped up the Mississippi River. Mm-hmm. America was the place where nearly 4,000 of our fellow citizens were lynched, where courts enshrined separate be equal. So when people say to me the monuments in question are history, well, what I just described is real history as well, and it's searing truth. And it begs the question, why are there no slave ship monuments, no prominent markers on public lands, nothing to remember this long chapter in our lives, the pain, the sacrifice, the shame, all of it happening on the soil of New Orleans? So anyway, my opinion is that I think it's up to a community to decide, because history is a living thing. History is continually contested. And what does this community think of when they see this person? Because I would think that the community would see this person in total. So a Gandhi statue would probably play very differently in India than it would in Africa. Mm-hmm. So that's my take on it. But what's your take on it, James?
Well, I agree with you, Scott. I think the local community, they should have the freedom to keep the statue or get rid of the statue if they want. And I can understand the viewpoint of people who don't want the statues. I mean, if you think, especially, let's say you're African American and you see this statue of Jefferson Davis, who was leading a nation founded primarily to protect the rights to have slavery. And yes, that's why the Confederacy was founded. I'm not going to, we're not going to do that.
James and I talked all about that,
Yeah, go back and listen. We've got proof, and there's plenty of documentary proof. That doesn't mean all the people in the North were saints either. Far from it. But
no.
But I could certainly see, because when you put a statue up, you are by definition honoring that person. You are saying this person is worthy of honor, or at least respect. I hate to see the statues get destroyed. I prefer to see them moved somewhere else to a museum or something, or maybe even put a plaque next to it explaining who this person was and why they did what they did. But yeah, I can certainly see the viewpoint of those who do not want the statues. I think that your view of Confederate monuments largely depends on your current politics today. And, I myself, I'm pretty conservative, but I'm not I don't consider myself far right, but I'm a Southern Unionist. I mean, I've grew up in Texas and lived in Texas almost all my life. I've never lived outside the South except when I was in Eastern Europe, but in the U.S. Yeah. But I mean, I'm a Unionist. I support the Union cause. Can I comment on one thing briefly? Somebody asked in the comments, were the Southerners considered traitors at the time?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. That was an interesting question.
I think that certainly depends on who you were. The Southerners themselves would have said, we are protecting our own rights. The government has become too powerful to become tyrannical. There's too many Northerners talking about wanting to free the slaves. So we're defending our property. We're defending our rights. And then when the North invaded the South, they said, we're defending our country. They interviewed this one. Speaking of prisoners, there was a Southern prisoner captured, and the Northerners asked him, why are you fighting? And he said, I'm fighting because you're down here. It's very simple. I'm defending my homeland. And in the North, there was division. We did talk a lot about this in one of the episodes. There were the Republicans, especially the radical Republicans, would have said, absolutely, they are traitors. A lot of Democrats would have said, well, no, what they're doing is not right, but we certainly understand it. Democrats were a lot more sympathetic toward slavery and white supremacy and the right for the South to live the way they've always lived. It's interesting. There was one Civil War song called Battle Cry of Freedom, which you should definitely listen to. Just Google it. You can find it. And both sides sung the song, but they had different lyrics. And the Northern side, one of the lines says, the Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah. I won't sing it, but and it said, down with the traitors and up with the stars, meaning the stars and stripes. So yes, there were a lot of Northerners that considered the South to be traitors.
Yeah, and something James and I discussed on how Southerners themselves saw it is at this time in America, the Revolutionary War was sort of like what World War II is to us today. It's in the past, but you can meet people who lived through it at that point. It's kind of this glorious celebrated event, and there's maybe a part of people that want to emulate that. And the idea for many Southerners, we mentioned the onset of the series, is Southerners believe that a scrappy ragtag group that is fighting for a noble cause can defeat a better equipped enemy, much as the Americans did the British. And many of them argued, and some still argue to this day, that the Constitution allows for secession for different reasons due to the self-determination of the states. Now, a whole body of law and constitutional law would argue against that, and some would argue that Andrew Jackson settled the whole issue with the Force Clause back in the 1830s. And it wasn't open for debate at that end, but those who were advocating were saying this is still an open question, and some even argue today that it still was. So, on the whole kind of the lost cause side of things. So,
by the way, I got a shout out to my daughter. I'm sorry, Scott. Hi, Audrey. And my daughter Audrey just put a comment. So, Scott, can I bring up one other question that was really interesting?
Please.
Yeah, my buddy Steve Guerra. He's a long-time podcaster. Steve, I wonder if he's still there, but he's sick and he's got a sick child. But Steve, by the way, y'all, he does two really good podcasts. The History of the Papacy, which is really more like just the history of the Christian church in general. And then Beyond the Big Screen. Scott and I have both been a guest on that show.
Yes. Check it out.
And excellent shows, both of them. And Steve asks, which episode, maybe this is a good way to wrap up. I mean, we don't have to make this the last question, but it's getting time. Yeah. We got kids and stuff we got to deal with. But, he says, I don't have it in front of me, but I'll paraphrase it. He says, what episode did we like the best? What were we, he said, well, first of all, he said it was a great series. Thank you, Steve, for saying that. We appreciate that. And thank you for all the nice comments. We've gotten so much love, especially in History Unplugged. We appreciate that. It makes us really want to do it again, which we're planning to, as we've already mentioned, with the Revolutionary War. But Steve asks, what episode are you the most proud of, or what part of the series are you the most proud of? What would you say, Scott?
Well, you did a lot more work. So
yeah,
that's
that's right. No,
yeah,
that's kidding. I enjoyed it. I really did.
Yeah, so that's one thing. I think I liked the final episode of where we talked about what are the living legacies of the Civil War. I mean, it's really hard to decide because there were so many colorful characters, and it was just getting into their lives. And us trying to do our best to resurrect this world that seems strange to us now. But yeah, I think I liked the final episode of seeing what does it mean now? How does how America was in some way, it would have been somewhat alien to us if we saw it in its antebellum days. So really, I mean, many of the institutions that govern a lot of American life are post World War II, but the DNA of America was really sequenced, I guess, if I want to not mess up my analogy. The genome was sequenced after the Civil War. So
yeah, it's like we said, the Revolutionary War determined, are we even going to be a nation at all? But the Civil War settled the question of, are we going, well, what kind of nation are we going to be? There was this debate going all the way back to Hamilton and Jefferson as to, are we going to be an agricultural nation? Or are we going to be a nation that's more industrial, focused on manufacturing and commerce and trade and banking? And the Civil War settled that. Hamilton won.
So we're in Hamilton's world, whether you like
Hamilton's
it or not.
world. Alexander Hamilton. He won. One other thing. Oh, and also one I liked. I agree with you, Scott. It was fun to be able to wrap it up and sum it up and reflect on the war. I liked doing all of them, actually, but I also like what happened to them later, the epilogue where we talked about, because I always wonder, gee, what happened to this person after the war? So hopefully y'all like that. We didn't get very many. I don't think we got many comments on that, but it's just kind of neat. Like Irvin McDowell, terrible general, but he goes off and helps found a park in San Francisco. That's pretty cool. What was it? Meade goes off and invents all this cool stuff. And Chamberlain becomes a lot of them became governors and other politicians. One other question, I'm going to throw this in. Chris Gwinnessy says, when can we expect the history of the Franco-Prussian War in 10 battles? I'm like, well, you're going to have to get somebody else, Scott. We're
going to have to dig down if I can get into a history of the Russo-Ottoman War of 1870 in 10 battles. If we want to see,
I could help with that.
If we want to see listenership absolutely plummet, then Eastern Europe. That's your research area, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm pretty rusty, but I could go back.
I mean, we had the Northern Southerner dynamic here in the podcast. If we want to do 1389 and the Ottoman conquest of Kosovo, if you want to be the Serb, you can be the Serb, I'll be the Turk. So that's how we can handle that divide right there.
And I'll have a bottle of Slivovitz on one side and a bottle of Rakia on the other side, plum brandy, peach brandy.
Oh, rakia. They call it rakia is the Turkish drink. It's made of grapes. So, oh, wow. So
there's a lot of Turkish words in the Serbian language. During the Bosnian War, the Civil War, the Serbian parliament actually passed a law. I think, if I remember the story correctly, they were going to remove all the words of Turkish origin and just like purify it, quote unquote, the language and make it more Slavic. And that, they realized after almost no time, we can't do this. We won't have any words left, hardly.
Yeah.
Donald Kurt says, I would like other wars. So we're working on it, Donald.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll have to.
War.
Right. The way we focus on, I think we'll have to choose wars that connect with people and are big enough to, Franco-Prussian War, there's plenty to say there, but that
I
could get
don't
a
know
little
that
bit
many
into the weeds.
people in American history fanatics would be that interested in it. But I'd like to do the War of 1812. I think that would be a much shorter series, but that's a war that very few people know much about, and I don't know that much about it